A very warm welcome to all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's guest, Professor Jajati Keshri Parida. Professor Parida is currently a professor of economics at the University of Hyderabad. He has done his PhD from the Institute of Social and Economic Change in Bangalore. Professor Parida's work primarily focuses on areas like employment and labor migration, poverty and human development. His research has been published in journals such as the World Development, Social Indicators Research, Economic Change and Restructuring, Economic and Political Weekly, and the Indian Journal of Labour Economics. He has also written several policy papers, including op-ed pieces for the Indian Express, the Hindu, the Financial Express, and the Hindustan Times. Professor Parida's book, India Out of Work, is going to be published by Bloomsbury, London shortly. Professor Parida is involved in a lot of policy related work. He is a member of the State Planning Board of the Government of Kerala. He's also contributed to the Karnataka Human Development Reports published by the Government of Karnataka. He's a life member of the Indian Society of Labour Economics and the Indian Econometric Society. He's also an associate editor for the Indian Journal of Labour Economics. He has worked on various consultancy projects for organizations such as the ILO, the ADB, Wadhwani Foundation, the Swiss Development Corporation, and the Population Council of India. Because of his contributions to labour economics, Professor Parida has been recognized with the L.K. Deshpande Young Labour Economist Award of the Indian Society of Labour Economics. Professor Jajati Parida, it's really a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to your lecture on data and concepts in migration. Over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
What I'll do is that I will throughout my presentation I'll be driving you through data and some figures. I will try my best to link them with the existing theories of migration. Basically, migration into Odisha and migration out of Odisha. That will be the main topic of my discussion. But as you rightly said that at the initial few slides, I'll be discussing on definitions of migration, which has been used by both in NSSO and census. Then quickly I'll come to the facts and figures. Then I'll try to link it to existing migration theories. The topic I'm going to cover today is migration scenario in Odisha. But well, before that, I would like to tell you that this is going to be the outline of my presentation today. I have already discussed about it. So, for the first few minutes, I'll be discussing on various definitions of migration, particularly those definitions which we use while collecting the information on migration. Not the theoretical definition per se, but the definitions we use while collecting information, various agencies like Census of India and NSS. Then the second part of my lecture, I'll be discussing only facts and figures, particularly the migration trends and what are different patterns of composition, maybe on the composition by gender, by age group, educational level of migrants, and their socioeconomic classifications and employment status. To some extent, I'll try to connect. Well, when it comes to migration surveys in India, we have two main agencies which collect information on migration. The first one is the Census of India, which collects information at every 10 years period of time, with a gap of 10 years period of time. But since the Census of India has not been conducted for last census, so migration data based on census information is not available. The updated information is not available with us. The latest information on migration is 2011, which is quite old data. But we have another better alternate source of migration data, which collects information at all India level across the states and union territory, is the National Sample Survey. The National Sample Survey collects migration information in various quinquennial rounds, not exactly on a 5 period of gap, but more or less same. Sometimes it goes from 5 to 10 years gap. It collects information. So if I could trace out a few of the surveys for which the unit level data is also available and migration reports are well readily available in the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation website, is the starting is the 38th round of migration data. So this round is called employment, unemployment, and migration specific rounds. Along with the employment unemployment round, the National Sample Survey is to collect information on migration and remittances and some characteristics of the households of migrants as well as their employment status. This particular trend has continued up to the year 2007-8, and after 2007-8, the National Sample Survey has not conducted any survey, although it has conducted a few employment and unemployment surveys, but the information on migration, remittances, etc. has not been collected thereafter. And most recently, the National Sample Survey's approach to collection of data has changed, and they have substituted the employment unemployment survey by a periodic level for survey, which is normally designed to collect information for every year. So on one hand, it is a very good trend that every year we are going to get some information, but the tragedy of migration survey still continues. So in the year 2020-21, the COVID period, along with the PLFS data, they have put only a few information on migration. That is, not a detailed survey of migration, unlike the survey of 2007-8, but a survey which collects only some information about migrant, their place of residence and their usual place of residence, etc., but not a full-fledged. They have not collected any information on the remittances and other dimensions of migration. And the year following the year 2020-21, there was a specific survey. They have designed it like the year 2007-8 survey, 64th round. That data is not yet available for public consumption. So that is one of the drawback of doing migration research in India based on national level sample survey. But those who wants to do their own survey and they can come out with some micro level evidences, that is always there. The freedom is up to the researcher. But if we want to work at all India level data and using some secondary sources of data, the national level sources, so these are the informations, these are the years for which they have collected migration information, and this data and the survey reports are well readily available in the Ministry of Statistics website. Anyone can download them and make use of these data for their own research purposes. Now, coming to the definition, as from the beginning, I have already told you that I'll stick to some empirical definition of migration, not stick to the theoretical definition of migration, because every discipline has their own way of defining migration in different ways. Normally, demographers have their own approach, economists have their approach, sociologists have their approach. Sometimes, the phenomenon of migration is a topic, is a multidisciplinary topic, so people have their theoretical definitions. That is the reason the theoretical definition slightly varies from discipline to discipline. When it comes to empirical definition, I will broadly classify them into two important criteria. One is called the place of birth criteria, which is the census of India. Normally, it uses that place of birth criteria, earlier at the earlier rounds, like I have already explained, from 1983, 87, 93 to 99, these earlier rounds, only the place of birth criteria have been used as a definition to define a particular person is a migrant or not migrant. In that case, they say the place of residence, and a place of current residence, that is the duration of, for example, let's say for the last 6 months, if a particular person is residing in a particular place which is different from the place where he or she was born, so then that particular person could be called as a migrant. Otherwise, he or she is not a migrant. Now, there is another definition of migration. That criteria is called place of last residence. The place of last resident criteria was normally used by National Sample Survey, but census also implemented that definition of migration. And along with the place of birth criteria, they have also used in few recent years. So they have used place of few recent years means few recent census in 2001, 2011, and well, I think before that 1991 also they have used the place of last resident criteria. In that case, along with the place of birth criteria, they have also used the place of last resident criteria. They said if the last resident, the place of last resident, that means with a duration of 6 months, a particular person is residing in a particular place where his last resident is different. Now the particular person is changing its resident from one place to other. Then his what was his, like a particular person has two places of residence. Then we need to say whether the difference, the last resident was is different, and if it is different, what is the duration of that difference? If the duration is 6 months and more, and the last resident and the current residents are not equal or not same, the person will be defined as a migrant as per the place of last resident criteria. Now, when it comes to defining the migrant based on the geographical distance they traveled, so well, we have several classifications, but one broad classification will be internal versus international. Internal migrants are those who move or they migrate either based on place of birth criteria or place of last resident criteria. Doesn't matter if the distance they move is within the national frontier or within the national territory of a country. In case of India, if a particular person is migrating within the national territory of India, is called an internal migrant. Whereas the person who moves outside India, like from India to other countries of the world, any country of the world except India, so that particular person is called an international. In this case, both in and out is considered. Now, those who are going out of India, they are called immigrants, and the total flow, you can say immigration flow. And those who are other nationals, they are coming and residing in India, and they are migrants, so we call them as immigrants. So hence, total flow of immigrants are called immigration, immigration. Now, in case of internal migration, again, if we segregate them based on the distance they travel, so again, we can classify them into 4 or 3 main categories. So, a particular person who moves from one provincial state to other provincial states, and the person satisfies the criteria of migration definition as per the time and this thing, then we call them, the persons who are moving one state to other provincial states are called interstate migrants. Whereas those who move within a particular provincial states, they are called intrastate migrants. So interstate, between states. When it comes to intrastate, it is migrants within the provincial state. Then within the state migrants, if we then segregate them into two important categories, again we can say the unit of the migration units or the distance is restricted to the district's administration, or you can say the geographical location is the district in which they reside. So if a particular person is a migrant and he or she moves out of the district, from one district to other district, they are called inter-district migrants, whereas those who move within the district are called intra-district migrants. Now if we look at the distance per se, we can say the shortest distance migrants are those who move within the district of their residence, within a particular state, then within the district. Then the next distance category is inter-district migrants, and interstate migrants are the third category. But three of them, all these category of migration flows are called as internal migrant because they move within the national frontier. They do not go outside India. They reside within India. Now, coming to another dimension of migration, which is based on the time or duration criteria, we can call them permanent migrant, particularly those who have migrated for a period of more than 6 months, and often it more than 6 months means at least 6 months should be the period. If a particular person is moving, the distance or the duration of migration is less than 6 months, or sometimes 1 month, 2 months, etc. So those persons are called either seasonal or temporary migrants. But in addition to these definitions, when collect information, specific questions on the distance and the time criteria has been used normally in the interview schedule to collect information whether a particular person is a seasonal within state, intrastate, or interstate. This information normally the National Sample Survey collects, as well as the census also collects some of these information. Now, when it comes to in migration case, or internal migration case, so we can again divide them into out migrant and in migrant. A particular migrant who is moving from a particular place to other place. So we can say if the person is moving from one region A to region B. Now region A is the place we say is the place of origin. The place of origin is the place where the migrant is based. Now the migrant is moving to a different place. The place where the migrant is moving is called the destination place. Now moving from origin to destination is called out migrants. In the origin at place A, the migrant will be called as an out migrant. Where in place B, where the migrant is moving, in that place the migrant will be considered as an in migrant. So in that sense, in migration and out migration for different states at a different district, we can estimate based on the information that whether the particular person has moved out of this place A to any other place, or the particular person has came in to this particular place in some time, satisfying the criteria of duration and distance. So based on the difference between in and out migration is called net migration. Normally these are some of the indicators we use when we estimate the broad migration flows, the stocks and flows of migration. To estimate them, to calculate them, we use some of these definitions. So now let me move towards the facts and figures. So in Odisha, I'm restricting my analysis to the state of Odisha only, and following the definitions I have discussed earlier. So there is two important indicators I'll discuss in this particular figure. This figure is showing the trends of migration the migration trends. This is the case of the trend of internal migration of population. You know, the number of people who are residing in Odisha, and they are called in migration, in migrants, because they have moved from elsewhere within the state to Odisha, or a few of them have moved from other states of India to Odisha. So it consists of those who have moved from outside Odisha, as well as those who have moved within Odisha, but from within a district or between districts or from other states. So these three section of migrants, or these three category of migrant consist of my migration trend in this case. Now here I have estimated two things. One is the percentage of a migrant, that is total migrant population divided by population of Odisha, that is given in the orange color line, and the blue color line is showing the number of migrants in lakh. So now if we look at the figure, begin with the orange color line, the percentage of a migrant population per se, you could see that although the trend is rising. So in the year 1983, about 29% of the Odisha population were migrants. So this particular share has been increasing very, though the rate of increase is very slow. So in the year 2021, it reached to 33%. So this is a percentage of people who are defined as a migrant in Odisha. When it comes to the number of a migrant population, since the total population has been rising, so the number of migrants given in lakh. So in the year 83, it was 68 lakh total migrant population, or you can say about 7 million of the total population were migrant in the year 83. But this trend has been rising consistently, except the year 1993, where we got a downward trend of a total number of migrants. Since 1983, it has been rising consistently. Now the number has reached about 150 lakh, or you can say about 15 million of Odisha population are considered as migrants. Now coming to the composition of these migrants, as I have defined them previously, that intrastate, intra-district, inter-district, and the interstate migrants, you could see that the distance they travel is very less. The distance the migrants travel, the Odisha migrants, particularly those who are residing within Odisha. So most of the migrants, about 70%, 69% in the year 2021, or in the starting year 83, about 80% of the migrants, they move shorter distance. That means distance is still a factor for the migrant, maybe because of several reasons. This particular fact can be connected to the theory of gravity theory of migration, which says that a distance is still distance act as a negative factor in migration. But in the early phases of migration, when the infrastructure development was not much there, so people might have traveled shorter distances. But here the problem is very complex. We cannot stick to one particular theory when we explain the migration behavior of the population. So I could say that a complex set of factors are together, they decide the migratory movement of people of Odisha. But well, distance is still an important factor, although the share of migrants who move shorter distance, it has been showing a declining trend. But that trend, in aggregate sense, the rate of or the share of migrant who move shorter distance has come down from 80% to 70%. population. Only a 10 percentage point decline happened in last 4 decades, about 4 decades. So that has not, there was, not much change happened in that particular dimension. There could be several factors. I'm going to discuss them one by one in my following slides. One important factor is the human capability. The human capital position of the migrants and the occupation in which they are engaged in. Most of these migrants are either female or they are low skilled, illiterate, or their maximum level of education is a primary level of education, which maybe act as a deteriorating factor or is a constant for the migrants who move to much distance places where they can get better employment opportunity. Most of these migrants move shorter distance to take up some jobs which are close to their vicinity, their area of, you can say, their place of birth or their place of usual place of residence. They do not move, more distance places. But one important dimension is when we move to the inter-district case, we could see that the percentage of migrants or the share of migrant uh, in the inter-district category has been rising. That is one of the indicator that at least with the possession of a skill or education level with rising means of schooling, at least some people were able to move to some, at least they were able to move within the district of Odisha, from one district to other district of Odisha. Maybe urbanization could be one of the factor in Odisha, though the rate of urbanization is very slow, and urban population still hold a very negligible share of a total population. But urbanization led, opportunity led migration, the pulling factor within the broader framework of a pull and push, if we could see that, maybe the pull factor is acting as a driving force for the migrant to come out of the rural places to at least some of the towns or suburb areas in search of some employment opportunities. And hence, the percentage figure of migrants moving inter-district has been rising. It was about 14% in the year 83, and it has gone up to 22%. So it is a substantial rise in this particular category. When it comes to migrants who are moving from other states to India, other states to Odisha, it has been, although again the percentage share is lesser, but there is an increasing trend. That means people from other state have also they are moving to Odisha in search of some employment or other business opportunities, but their share in total migratory movement is very, very negligible. When it comes to immigrants, people from other countries moving to Odisha, it's still a very, very negligible. It's close to zero. Their percentage share is very, very negligible. But overall, from this slide, if we want to have a conclusion, we can say that now within Odisha, those who are migrant population residing in Odisha, the in-migrants in Odisha, most of them are the native of Odisha. They are native people, and they move either within the district or between the district they move. And the total migrant population in India, those who cannot make longer distance movements can be considered as low skill migrant. But I'll come back to this particular point and explain in my next slides. So till that we need to wait for that particular point. Now, coming to the gender dimension of migrants, like the all India level figure also shows that, female constitute a major share. Now, this particular point is clear partially when we disaggregate the total migrant population by their gender. Now, the shorter distance, the people who make shorter distance, the shortest distance, in fact, so most of them would be women. They tend to move after their marriage. So, due to our cultural settings, female normally, most of the female, I would say, they migrate from their place of birth to their in-laws place. So when the migration survey is conducted or the census is conducted, this female, given the definition of migration, we say, well, your place of birth and place of current residence are different. So females are automatically considered as migrants. Now, when it comes to the reason behind their migration, they say, yeah, well, we move after our marriage is happened. So in that case, so the definition of migration we use to collect information needs to be changed in that case. Those who moved after their marriage, maybe in demographic sense they are migrant, in sociological sense they are migrant, but in economic sense they are not, their migration is not driven by some of the factors, the push-pull factors, or some of the factors that we are going to discuss, which could be an outcome of the family level optimization process. So, well, because of the customs and traditions and some of the sociological factors or cultural settings, they just move from one place to another. And you could see that the share of a female in the total migrant population is they hold a major chunk, about 80% of, or even more than 80% of the migrants in Odisha are female, and this is understood as I have explained, the factors. Now coming to the skill level, here the skill is a very subjective thing. We may not define the skill of a person based on the educational level per se they have, but well, it could be a good proxy to measure the skill level of the population. We say those who are either illiterate, not literate, or literate up to below primary level of education, if they constitute a major share of the total migrant, we can say the total migration, in migrant population in Odisha is not, acquired much skill, although they might have been doing a better job in the occupation they are engaged in, but when it comes to their the earning level or the wages or the salary they earn, so based on that, we can say that most of them will be earning lesser as compared to those who have better level of education. Hence, education as a proxy for skill, I would like to say that most of the migrant who are residing in Odisha, the in migrants, most of them are low skilled based on their education level and earning level. So either they are illiterate or the maximum the level of education is up to primary. Now, when it comes to secondary and secondary level of education, well, over the period of 1983 to 2021, the pattern of migration has been changing, and people with secondary level of education, their share has been rising, but it is not up to the mark. That means people with some skilled, semi-skilled level whose earning will be relatively better than that of their low-skilled counterparts. Their share has been rising in recent past, but this trend could have been increased, in a much larger way, or you can say the though there is a change in the pattern of migration, but this change is quite negligible. Quite negligible. It is not, not, quite substantial, not quite substantial. Well, in case of graduate and above level of education, a similar trend is there. It has over the period of last 30 to 40 years. So only a marginal, 1 percentage point rise in the share of graduate and above level of education is there. That means those who are moving within Odisha, the migrants, the in-migrants population of Odisha, most of them are low skilled, and a very negligible portion, you can say about 25 to 25% of them, one fourth of them are, they possess education which is above secondary level of education. So that is quite, a point which could be a matter of concern for the policymakers in Odisha, and in other states also will reflect similar kind of trend, where I have done some research, but I'm sticking to Odisha at this moment. Now, coming to the reason behind migration, as I have been already, it has been explained in my previous slide. I was saying that when it comes to the male and female, you could see that while male, most of the male, they migrate because of some economic reason, some the reason behind their movement is either employment or some cases which will be related to employment, business, etc. But in case of female, you could see that the green color line is marriage. So marriage is a dominant reason for female migration in Odisha. Where in case of male, you could see that orange color line, and blue, orange, and this gray color line. So these are the region related to employment specific reason. In case of female, it is quite negligible. Only about 1% of them they move because of employment related reason. But in case of male, you could see that about a substantial more than 40% of the male they move because of employment related reasons. About 45 to 46 percent of male, they move or they migrate because of employment related reasons, whereas in case of female, it is mostly marriage led migration. Now, coming to the in-migrants in Odisha from other states, that means here, just the total in-migrants population is divided into migrants within the state and migrants from other states. If you see the characteristics of a migrant who moved from other states to Odisha, you could see that there are three different phases. So in the first phases during 80s and early 90s, the number of migrants in lakh, it has been showing a declining trend. So about 4.3 lakh migrant population to 3.2 lakh, it has a decline for that particular decade, particular 83 to 93 decade, we can say. But in the later stages during the early 90s and until the mid or late noughties, the period between 2000 and 2010, you could see that the migration trend has increased from other state to India. But then by 2007-8, it has stagnated a little bit. It has come down. In the 1990-2001, it has increased, but then following period, survey year, it has shown a declining trend. But most recently, you could say that in the phase 3, the number of migrants from other state, their number has increased substantially. It is almost more than double between 2007-8 to 2020-21. Well, because of the COVID-19 shock, maybe a few of the migrants have gone back to their native places. Had COVID-19 factor been corrected for this particular trend, we could have seen that the true picture is total number of migrant or the state migrant in India could be well above this 13 lakh in fact. Now coming to the share of male and the share of male is rising and dominant in case of in-migration flow to Odisha. Now, when we disaggregate this total migration flows to Odisha from other states, you could see that the share of male migrants has been rising. Is at the rise over the last 3 decades, but the share of female migrants has been declining. So that is what we can say, that people, they do not migrate with their families, and if a female migrant from other states, they are migrating to Odisha, maybe well, their reason for migrant could be slightly different from the overall trend of female migrants in India. Maybe these particular female migrants are moving because of some economic reason or some employment related issues, or they will move along with their earning member of the family. Now, the reason behind this migration is showing that about 88% of the female were migrating because of marriage in the year 93, and that component has declined substantially to 46%. And women who move with their family, that shows a slightly rise. And the other reason for migrant, other socio-economic factors, or cultural factors, environmental factors, so they play a major role in case of a female migratory movements. When in the case of male, in contrast, you see that about half of the male, they move to Odisha because of employment related reason, and only a few of them, they move with their family. Maybe they are young kids who depend on their parents, and a substantial portion of them, they move because of other reasons. So the other reasons, as I have already explained before in my slide, the other reason includes post-retirement, housing problem, acquisition of own house, health-related reason, displacement by development project, socio-political problems, natural disaster, etc. So these are, the other reason for migratory movement of people to Odisha. So now coming to the out migration scenario, that means people of Odisha who migrate from Odisha to the rest of the states, to the other states, and a few of them, those who let us discuss that first, then I will come to the other particular aspect, which is quite confusing. Now, out migration trend from Odisha to other state, if we measure by their percentage as well as the absolute number, you could see that like the in migration trend, the out migration trend also has been increasing, and the percentage figure is very very close to each other. In the 83, it was the in migration percentage was also about 28%, and the out migration trend is also about 28%. When it comes to the year 2020-21, so it was somewhere 31 to 32% of the total population of Odisha were migrant. When it comes to out migrant from Odisha to the total population of Odisha, again about 30% of the population, from 32% of the population, they are moving out to other states of Odisha. So that means if we calculate the in and out migration and net migration will be close to 0 or 1%, maybe plus or minus. So I didn't do that. Anyone can do that. By taking simply the difference between in and out migration. When it comes to the number of migrants, you could see that between 80s and 90s, the out migration trend from Odisha was was a bit flat, So it was not increasing up to, at a greater, the growth rate of migrants were almost stagnant, or it was slightly positive. But after 1993, after the liberalization period, the migratory movement of people from Odisha has started, and it has been continuing with a rising trend. Maybe this particular band between 2007 and 8 to 2020-21 is maybe because of COVID-19 issues. Many of them might have come back to Odisha, but well, the figure is, the trend has been rising. When we disaggregate these migratory movements by the states, we could see that how the migration pattern from Odisha has been changing. Now, this particular map is showing that where the people of Odisha were used to move. Now you could see that the red color, in the scale, the red, yellow, and a light green portion are saying the places where most of the migrants were moving. And you could well see that even outside Odisha, people were moving to only the neighboring states. The neighboring states, the major migration receiving states from Odisha were West Bengal in the year 1983. It is followed by Bihar and Jharkhand, the undivided Bihar, and Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, another neighboring states, and in the down south, it is like Andhra and Telangana. So these were the neighboring states where people used to move. And well, I could say that this migratory movement of people will be, a majority of them would be low skill. They will be migrating to, take up some informal kind of job, and only a negligible portion of them would be migrant with a better skill, who could have moved to to take up better employment opportunities or better occupations or formal jobs in some either government or private sectors. Now, when we come to 1993, you could see that the destination of migrants has changed slightly from the neighboring states. Still, the neighboring states, the migration outflows to the neighboring states were quite dominant, but you could see that people started moving towards Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh. These were the new destination of migrants, apart from the neighboring states like West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh undivided, and Madhya Pradesh undivided, including Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and other neighboring states like Bihar, Jharkhand. When it comes to the year 2007, well, you could see that how the people from Odisha, they are gradually moving to different distance places over the period of time. So now here you could see that the new destination states were added in the year 2007-8 were Gujarat. Then the flow to Maharashtra has increased to a greater extent. Then Karnataka, and these are the new destination states. So that means in the year 2007-8, some of the people, a proportion of skilled or semi-skilled migration might have increased, which which enabled the Odisha migrant to move to distant places to take up some of the semi-skilled and skilled jobs, apart from those who are going to the neighboring states and taking up some of the low-skilled and informal sector jobs. Still, their share is dominant even today, but the composition of migrants and the distance they travel are quite correlated to one another. So it could be reflected from this particular map. Now, coming to the most recent evidence, you could see that even the destination of the migrants and their flow, their composition to the distant states like Karnataka, particularly the states where major metro cities are there, and a few advanced cities are there. So people are moving to those states with their share has been rising over the period. So this is the changing pattern of migration, out migration from Odisha, that can be quite clearly visible from the four maps that I have shown you in sequence. Now, if you put them together, you could see that the states, I have already discussed the destination of migrants, out migrants from Odisha, were mostly the neighboring states in the 80s and in the 90s, and gradually in the noughties and in the 2020s, I can say early 20s. So the destination of migrants has been it has been expanding. Maybe a social network is at work. Gradually, the social network has been built among the informal worker. Of course, we can connect this to the social network theory, but not exactly, because among skilled workers, that social network is not that much stronger. But I would rather say that social network is much stronger among informal workers, and the low skilled workers. That is why where they move, so they can take the social network plays an important role in that case. But overall, I would like to say that still the push pull factor is a dominant play a dominant role, particularly the pushing factors, the unemployment, lack of job opportunity in Odisha, etc., are the major pushing factors. The poverty per se, that Odisha is one of the states where poverty is still much higher. It's comparable to the states like Bihar, Jharkhand. In the bottom states where incidence of poverty is higher. So the migratory movement of people in that case would be a strategy to get out of poverty, or to going for a better livelihood, in search of a better livelihood. So hence a major portion of the migrant, they move to other states for that reason. Apart from a few recent migrants who move with a better level of human capital, and they go for accepting or in search of better employment opportunities or formal job opportunities, their share is has been rising, and but quite negligible even today. Now, coming to out migration from the states, from the origin districts, I would like to tell you that the 83 things, the district division was not much clear, so I could not estimate that. Let me begin with 1999 2000, and thereafter, what happens to the origins district from where people used to move to other part of Odisha, to other part of India, outside India. When we see that, who are the districts, those who are the main origin places from which, people were moving out of Odisha. So you could see that the blue color line is the major, migratory, the composition of total out migration. Majority of the out migrants were from those states. For example, Cuttack, one of the advanced, in terms of urbanization, it is one of the advanced or urbanized, district of Odisha, and Khordha, where our capital city Bhubaneswar is there. So Khordha, Cuttack, and Nayagad, there, this Nayagad, Khordha is undivided districts of Khordha. So, and Ganjam and Bhadrak, these were the states, Jajpur. So these were, mostly the coastal districts were the major origin districts from where the out migration was taking place in the late 90s. When, this particular, I would rather say that, in the year 2022 you could see that slightly there was a change, and people from the other part of Odisha, particularly the western and the southern part of Odisha and the northeastern part of Odisha, they are also taking migratory movement. But the major source, the main district from which people were moving has been changed. Earlier it was Cuttack, but now it has moved to Ganjam. Where the Ganjam to there exist actually, in fact, several migration threads that the people from Bhadrak and this particular northeastern part of Odisha, they used to move to towards Kolkata and Bihar. Kolkata means West Bengal and Bihar, whereas people from Ganjam have a social network, stronger social network towards the western part of India, like Mumbai and Gujarat. So this particular trend is much stronger, which has been evident from the fact. And a few other migratory movement, like the states which are in the western part of Odisha, like Bargarh, Balangir and Kalahandi, people started moving. These are now the contributory districts which contribute towards out migration. But again, I would like to say that major portion of these migrants are low skilled, whereas the people from this particular district in the coastal belt, a few skilled people, they are moving out of Odisha. Now this is the changing out migration pattern. I have already explained in through the maps. So let me move towards the out migration flow by their gender categories. Now, if you see that there exists hardly any difference in this particular case, unlike the previous figure I have explained in case of in migration, the migrants mostly they were female. When it comes to out migration, both male and female constitute almost pretty close share. So about, if you say, so out of total migratory out migrants, where in the year 2022 81 lakh or 8 million were female, where 6.4 million were male. So maybe some of these females are moving along with their family, but a quite number of them would have been moved for their own employment opportunities. So this is a particular trend that is very, very interesting to look at this particular. When it comes to out migration, so the marriage may not play a dominant role, but it has its role. But it may not be the role. So the pattern of migration, the marriage-led migration to other dimension of migration could be, we could hypothesize from this. But well, if I would check, if the evidence is there in the later slide, it will be very, very clear to you that how the male and female migration is taking place, out migration from Odisha is taking place. This is the share of migrants. Female still holds a larger or better share, but not up to the mark, like in the case of in migration. In the case of in migration, female were constituting about 80% of the total migratory movement, but in case of out migration, their share is only slightly better. They are 56%, whereas their male counterpart constitute about 44% of the total migrant population who are residing outside Odisha, or they are precisely called the out migrants from Odisha. When it comes to the flow, from where they are moving, so you could see that earlier, in the early period during the early 80s, and you could see that majority of them were moving from one rural area to other rural area. That means from rural area of Odisha to other rural area of other states. About 50% of them were that kind of migrants, and about 12% of the migrant, they were moving from rural area of Odisha to other urban area of other states. And this particular trend has shifted. Now the share of rural to rural migration over the period has been declining. So it has declined from 53 to 31%, whereas the rural to urban migrants, their share has been increasing, and it has increased from 12% to 41% by the 2021. And urban to rural, the reverse migration, you could see that the reverse migration is quite negligible in the total flow, but maybe because of the COVID year, about 6% of the population, they have come back. Maybe this puts a question on that the scale in which people have come back in other states. Maybe in Odisha, that much people have not come back to Odisha. And now coming to urban flow again, the urban to urban flow was quite higher. Rural to rural flow were quite higher. So these were the earlier trend, the trend of 80s and 90s. So in the later years, in the most recently, we would say that the share of urban to urban movement from urban area of Odisha to other urban area, still 22% of the migrant move that. They may be are high skilled, relatively skilled, or semi skilled, but those who move from rural to urban area may be quite negligible. Share of them will be high skilled, but mostly it will be dominated by semi skilled and low skilled. So that is precisely clear from this particular figure when I disaggregated the total migrant flows by their gender as well as by their the region for migrant. You could see that not 80-90%, but 66% of the female they migrate for marriage, and another 26% of them they move with the family. But employment in case of female, at least though it is quite low, but about 5 to 10% of the female they move for employment reason. And about a few of them, 1% of them they move because of education and other related reasons. In case of male, of course, the employment is the most dominant reason. And since a male member of the family were the main breadwinner because of the cultural, sociological settings in India, so female tends to move along with them as an associate migrant. But most recently, a few of them are migrating for their own employment. Could be it could be because of the way we collect data, because of in one of my research outcome recent research papers, I have found that those who report that they move because of marriage. So I have checked their employment status, and more than 50% of them are engaged in different activities. So that precisely says the way we collect information, migration information, the region for migration needs to be modified in order to capture the real picture of female migration. So keeping that as a point to be discussed maybe in a later stage. So I would here like to say, would like to highlight to the point that male migration is mainly driven by employment, and female migration is still associational movement. But that dimension of migration, the employment dimension of a female migrant, is under calculated or underestimated because of the methodological issues that needs to be discussed maybe later on. When it comes to the age profile, the demographic features of the migrant population, you could see that it is quite obvious that people belonging to the younger age groups, 15 to 29 years, or adult age groups who are is the main earning age group. We can say that in the total life cycle, those who are children or below 15 years of age, their share in the total migration is quite lower, as well as the people who are relatively older, approaching 50 or 60, their share is quite lower in the total migration flow, whereas people belonging to the younger age group, they take normally the migratory move, and hence their share in total migration is more. So this particular dimension is reflecting, how migrants in their life cycle, they take different decisions when they were adult and when they were the main earning member of the family, and that means at the family level some optimization is taking place following the new economics of a migration principle of Bloom and the Stark. So people in the age group of their young and adult age groups, they take most of the migratory movements, whereas although the share of elderly migrants and has been rising over the period, slightly increasing, and the share of children has been declining, but mostly the overall picture here is that there exists some kind of family level optimism is taking place when people are taking migratory decision making process. Well, in case of out migration, this is the share, age group by share. This is the number of migrants in lakhs. So both of them are reflecting the similar story, similar picture. When it comes to the education group, I have been discussing it, throughout my slides. Now the evidence has come before. You could see that, the trend of migrants with secondary and higher level of education has been rising. In total, you can say about 30% of the migrant in the year 2021 were migrants with some skill, secondary and higher level of education, and this trend has been rising for last you can say 30 years, but the share of illiterate and migrants has been declining substantially over this period. And of course the level of education primary, the share has been rising, but this share is both this illiterate and primary, the migrants with these two level of education can be considered as a low skill migrants, those who normally go and accept some low skill occupations. But people who with a secondary level of education, they move to at least accept some semi-skilled occupations where the earning will be bit higher than their low skilled counterparts. And of course the graduate and above level of education, migrants with graduate and above level of education can be considered as a relatively skilled migrant in the total migrant population. Now, the share again, a similar picture. I would rather skip that particular slide. But when it comes to social group-wise classification of the migrants, both the number and the share are shockingly, revealing or some shocking picture that people who belong to some particular category of caste, particularly social, scheduled tribe and scheduled caste, their share is negligible and it has been declining. That means in the early phases, these are the migrants who were constituting a proportion of a migrant in the low skill migrant. When the skill level of people are rising, so in the social hierarchy, people from belonging to some upper caste categories, higher caste categories, they have a dominant share. Although their number has been declining over the period with rise in the share of OBC population, but you could see that a major chunk of migrant populations are they belong to socially upper caste categories, and but the share of tribals and AC population in the year 1990 2000 were relatively their share was relatively higher, but if we compare with the other caste, other social group categories, they throughout the year they hold a major share in the total migration population. Those who are moving out, maybe I haven't examined the in migrants, so let me check it. So that would have been reflected different picture. Migration within the state, but migration from Odisha to other states are revealing this particular picture, that people belonging to some upper caste categories, upper social group categories, they constitute a major share of the total migration population in Odisha. Now, by economic group, you could see that, people belonging to lower economic quintiles, their share was, their number and share was relatively higher in the early periods. But in the later period, the share of, migrants in the upper income quintiles are. That means, Odisha, it's a state where, the incidence of poverty is higher. But within that, among the poor people, it could be said that, the cost and benefit of migration is, well, the theory explained by Hicks and, a few others. They have been saying, arguing in the early phases of migration, those who can bear the cost of migration, they can, take a migratory move. And for others, it may not be possible. But you could see that, people who belong to lower economic quintiles, they may be moving out of their residence, current residence, but their share is quite lower as compared to their upper income quintile counterparts. Now, the employment status of the migrants, you could see that, I have been discussing this, and I have been hinting that, I have a slide for that. You could see that, the employment status of the both male and female migrants, while most of the male migrant, you could see that their share among the migrants, the share of a regular salaried employee has been rising over the period, which is consistent with my argument of semi-skilled, low-skilled to semi-skilled to skilled migration, the changing pattern of migrant from low-skilled to skilled migrants. If the composition of migrants are changing, then their employment status will also change. Now, the share of a regular salaried worker were 14% in the year 1990, 2000, and that has increased to 39% in the year 2020. This is a good development. That means people from Odisha, those who are going out, their skill composition has been changing from low skill to better skill. And hence they are going to accept some regular kind of salary jobs, and their composition, within male, or either they are accepting a regular salaried job, or they're working as a self-employed. The share of self-employment among migrant population has also been increasing from 5 lakh to 11 lakh. Here, sorry, 14 lakh to 39 lakh. This is migrant in lakh. I'll have a figure. No, I don't have a figure on the share. So I'm sorry that I could have given that. No, I have not given. So I'm sorry for that. But when it comes to the share of casual levels, the daily wage levels, their share has been declining drastically to a low level of 5% among total migrant population, those who are male. In case of female, you could see that most of the female, they work as self-employed category, or self-employed category. But this could be that the fact that they are either like the recent employment or unemployment survey also revealed that the female mostly, if they work as self-employed, they work as unpaid family workers, so they might be doing that. But it is a good sign that female, at least those who migrate because of marriage, which we have seen in a couple of slides before, that they are still 27% of them, they work as self, and another 5% of them are working as a regular salaried worker, and about 5% in the year 2022, and in the year 2007 and 8, about 12% of them were working as a casual daily wage level. That means the employment status of the female migrant per se, these many millions of female. So a quite number of female migrants, they do participate in some kind of economic activities, and these are their employment status. Those who are found engaged as a self-employed, regular employee, or casual labor, all of them are workers. That means female migrant, although about 80 or 60% of them, they have revealed that they are migrating for marriage, a substantial portion of them are participating in the labor market. And in case of male, of course, many of them are participating in the labor market, and those who are going for studies and other reasons, the number is quite negligible. That means the migratory movement from Odisha to other states, although it is very complicated thing, but I would rather say that still the employment is one of the major driving force, or you could say it could be both push and pull, but both are at the work, and a combination of push and pull, like the Levensteins and others, theory Lee and Levensteins, they argued that it may not be because of a Lewisian transition, or maybe Aristotelian principle may not work there, particularly because we haven't examined the wage difference and the expected wage difference here. But we can say, in a broader sense, a set of push and pull factor work together, and a set of networks exist, which has been expanding in other states of India, that is driving the out migration pattern from Odisha to other states of India. Now, with this, I would like to conclude my slide, and these are the concluding statements, are the points that I have already been discussed in my throughout my lecture in the slide. I think with this, I would like to say thank you. This is all that is what I would like to speak about migratory movement of people from Odisha to rest of the states of India. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amrita.
Right. No, thanks, Jajati, for first taking us through the data and concepts of NSS data, and then, taking us through the characteristics of both in-migration, in-migrants, out-migration, out-migrants. Really, you really dissected the NSS data. So, specifically for students working on, this data set, this is going to be a very, very useful lecture. I have two questions. I mean, I know we've taken a lot of time, but, two questions. The first has to do with, why is it that you think that the social group, the migration rates by social group, that is Dalits and Adivasis declining and OBCs and other, which is upper caste, increasing like that pattern is very clear. Why do you think it might be like that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Now, what was one of the limitation of this particular lecture is that I have not disaggregated the in-migrant population. So this picture would have been much clearer from the in-migration picture, because most of the people who belonging to socially backward, marginalized communities, they may not be able to bear the migration cost, and hence their migratory movement is limited to within the district or within the state, we can say between the districts. But those who are taking off migration movements, most of them, although all the caste, across the caste category, people are moving, but a major chunk of them were either upper caste or OBC category. And if you say see the demographic structure of Odisha population, like any other states, so OBC constitute a major share, about 50% of the population. So that could be one of the factors that since a majority of the populations are OBC, their share in migration population is also higher. But very interestingly, it has been revealed that people belonging to upper quintile, like fifth quintile, fourth quintile, so their share is more in the migratory movement. Most of them are, then we can link up with the social group classification. People belonging to normally upper caste category, they belong to upper income quintiles, and hence they take off the decision. For them it could be an optimization decision, family optimization decision, and maybe their migratory movement is driven by a set of pull factors. But in case of the people who belonging to socially and as well as economically marginalized group, for them it could be a pushing factor. And that push factor is pushing them out of their home, but they cannot travel, much longer distance. Again, distance is a barrier for them because they cannot bear the migration cost. So this particular principle is also applicable for movement within India and outside India. We could see when we will see the overall migration flows across the states of India, you could see that a stronger social network and the migration cost is important in case of states like Kerala, Punjab, and Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. But in case of other states like for that matter West Bengal, but in other state case West Bengal as well as in Delhi, Haryana kind of states. But in case of other states, people belonging to Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, the Hindi heartland, and Odisha and Assam and other states, northern eastern part, they may not, they are moving within India, but they may not able to take migratory movement to other countries of the world. So the similar kind of a trend is working in case of the states when we examine in and out.
One last question. You've worked with NSS data, specifically looking at migration, and you've also done empirical work. Very few researchers have looked at both NSS data and done their own surveys and empirical work on migration. So could you tell us, especially for students who are working with NSS data sets, could you tell us some, perhaps, methodological limitations of the NSS data set when it comes to migration, and how you may have kind of addressed these in your empirical work to make your own data much richer?
Because these particular surveys are quite limited. They have quite limited process, and the way they collect information is also questionable. Because I have, during my presentation, I highlighted that female share in the marriage is the reason. It's quite dominant, it is quite obvious. The way they pose the questions is, you are a migrant and what is the reason? Obviously, female will say that after my marriage I have. But when we examine their employment status, it is clearly revealed that a substantial portion of them are post marriage, they are engaged in economic. So that kind of questions could be modified, but it is possible if frequently they do the surveys. If they don't do frequent surveys, one survey, then after 10 years, 15 years, one more survey. So maybe we could say that at the state level they are not doing much research before. Of course, they do. They constitute committees for discussing the questionnaire. But in migration, the data are we can say still quite limited. We do not have frequent migration surveys, and that is the only reason I am saying that one survey will be better, because if the surveys are not conducted frequently, at least in 5 years year gap or 10 years year gap, so it is not much interesting. We may not get it. We may not capture the dynamics of what is happening. Migratory movement, and the migration is as you and I will be agree that migration is a tendency which is there within our blood. So we tend to migrate, but the reason for migration, the factors behind migration is different. Each family have their own optimization process. Even it is they belong to different social categories or economic categories. So who optimize, and of course some of the macro level factors are different factors. Of course, employment opportunities and the level of development and many more factors like social network. They have their own role, but migration is always a kind of optimal decision making. Is an outcome of optimal decision making process.
No, thanks so much for emphasizing on the need to collect empirical data and how that, doing one's own surveys and empirical research, gives us very rich data and insights. So with that, we come to the end of this lecture. And this will go into the series where we discuss the empirics of migration, and as Professor Jajati discussed, Orissa migration in great detail from the NSS data. Thanks so much, Jajati. So that was Professor Jajati Parida. He took us through the concepts of migration in NSS data, and he also took us through the empirics of this migration using NSS data. He specifically focused on the case of Orissa, and as you saw in detail, the characteristics of in-migration, the characteristics of out-migration, the sectors where migrants are working, the destinations they go to, the gendered nature of migration. All of these things were covered in the presentation. What's also very interesting is that he also spoke a little bit about the limitations of NSS data, limitations specifically related to gender, where women are largely marriage migrants, so often their work is not captured. And this is something that we are going to be covering in a later lecture on gender and NSS data and migration. So I hope in this section on the empirics of migration, all of the loose ends from various lectures are coming together, tying together. So I hope that in the section of the empirics of migration, we are able to see the strengths and limitations of various existing data sets. And as Professor Jajati said, that it is always good to collect your own data, and migration data sets give us just a drop in the ocean, very little about migration. So I hope that a lecture like this also will help you plan and imagine your own empirical projects on migration. Thank you very much.